Genesis chapter 5 and verse 27, it tells us that the days of Methuselah were 969 years, and he died. When we read a verse like that, it may pop in our mind that we know that Methuselah is the longest person that ever lives, that kind of trivia fact. But have you ever considered how long 969 years is? If Methuselah were living in our time, he would have been able to go back and see the birth of the printing press and also be there to see the wonders of the internet. He would have been able to see the fall of the Mayan Empire, the rise of the British Empire, the decline. He would have known and seen every American president inaugurated into office. A Methuselah would have lived through what we consider to be most of modern history. 969 years. Would you want to live so long as Methuselah? I guess they just made them to last a little longer back then. Well, it tells us that God, looking down at man, put a limit on him. Because he was flesh, he made his days 120 years. It's interesting. We are living an average age longer. In other words, people, the average age somebody died a few years ago was in the 70s. Now it's in the mid-70s. But we don't get any longer than about 120 years. That cap is still, no matter how much modern medicine and technology we have, it's still there. But even 120 years seems like a long time. But it's interesting because the thought is there of we could last longer. Why don't we? You know, a lot of things that are made don't seem to last as long as they used to. It's not just people, right? As I told you, talking about our lesson today, my parents' freezer. Their old one lasted forever. Their new one didn't last so long. All kinds of products are that way. Maybe you've ever heard about the Oxford Bell. The Oxford Bell was a device. It was a battery connected to a bell that was invented around 1825. That's about 25 years after the first battery was ever invented. It has been continuously working for those 100 and made the bells where they don't ring anymore, but it still vibrates just as long with it for 176 years. In fact, the researchers want to know what the battery's made out of. They know the design is a dry pile battery, which is kind of common to our dry cell batteries of today, but they really don't know how it was constructed or what it's made of. They have to wait till it quits running to take it apart and see what made it last so long, but it's outlasted a lot of people who thought they were going to be able to look at it. There's something that was made that just ultimately keeps going and going and going. Why don't we have more things like that today? Well, you probably think of it as because we design it that way. You've probably heard of the term planned obsolescence. Companies figured out if they make something that lasts too long, they can only sell you one. But if it breaks down every so often, they can sell you a whole bunch. So years ago, companies decided to make things not near as long lasting. They tend to fall apart. We see it's hard to get replacement parts for anything. If you try to fix something, even if you want to, there's no parts available. In fact, even some modern technology companies have gone to the point where when they update their product, companies have gotten in trouble for doing that with cell phones. Because the idea is we don't want things that last too long. And that's seeped into our society. It's not just how we engineer products, but it's almost as if built to last isn't desirable. We think about things that used to last a long time, and they don't seem to last as long anymore. Marriages, churches, things that we would hope would be strong, much like anything else in society, tend to fall apart rather quickly. Why don't they make them like they used to? Well, tonight I want to look at some reasons why they don't, but not because we're real interested in product development, but rather because we're interested in our own personal development. And some of the same principles apply to us today. And if we want to be someone who lasts, maybe we need to think about how things that are built to last are made. You see, the reason things don't last like they used to is because it takes a lot of time. was a mechanic had a sign outside his shop. When he brought it in for repair, it said, "Quick, good, or cheap. You can pick two, but only two." In other words, you could have it cheap and you could have it quick, but it wasn't going to be very good. Most things to be good require time. They either require time to do it or time to learn how to do it. They require time to make sure it is done right. A lot of things don't last because we don't want to put the time in to make it. Better to make it quick and easy and send it out fast than to spend the effort and energy that are required to make something that lasts. But Proverbs chapter 20 verse 21 tells us that an inheritance gained hurriedly at the beginning will not be a blessing in the end. In other words, getting it all quickly, get rich quick, usually doesn't end up in a good thing. A lot of times get rich quick ends up long-term broke. Some of the things that we think if we want it now, don't really bring us the satisfaction we think they should. We live in a society that loves instant gratification, but for things to be made worthwhile, they take time. Peter writes in 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 6, "Humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you at the proper time." I got to thinking about that passage in this context. Usually when we look at that, we look at the side of humbling ourselves before God. But notice what it says, humble yourselves before God, so at the right time, he may exalt you. He may lift you up. In other words, God's going to take his time with you. To humble yourself before God says, I can't get it right when I want it right now, but I'll wait till God has done his complete work. James 5 verses 7 through 8 tells us, "My brethren, be patient until the coming of the Lord. The farmer waits for the precious produce of the soil, being patient about it, until it gets the early and late rains. You too be patient. Strengthen your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is near." James says, be patient. He has a plan for you, so be patient. If you want something that's going to last, a faith that will endure, it takes time. You don't learn all you need to learn in a minute. You don't get what you get quickly. Things of great value take time. If you take a bar of steel, it's worth roughly about $5. But if you work it and beat it into some horseshoes, it'll be worth about 10. If you beat it some more and turn it some more and make it into needles, it'll be worth 350. If you cut it some more and make it into knife blades, it'll be worth 32,000. If you bend it some more and work it some more and make it into springs for watches, it could be worth 250,000. The same steel, but turned differently. Imagine the drilling that poor bar must undergo to be worth a higher value. But the more it's manipulated, the more it's hammered, the more it passes through the fire, the more it's beaten up and pounded and polished, the time it takes makes it into greater value. The same thing is true for us. If we truly want to grow, if we truly want to be faithful for the long term, it's an investment in time. You see, the reason they don't make things like they used to is because not only does it take time, but it takes effort. I hope you were here last Sunday night for our graduation, senior graduation appreciation. At the end, Clay was talking to our seniors, and he said something that caught my attention. He was talking about Peter. And he said, when you look at Peter, Peter was one who was very dedicated to God. Luke chapter 22, verse 33, he tells Jesus, "Lord, I am ready to go to both prison and to death. I'll fight for you. I'll die for you." But you turn a few verses later in Luke 22, 57, and he denies him, saying, "I don't know him." What changed? What was so different between verse 33 and verse 57? I don't think it was his desire. He still loved the Lord, but forsake you when Jesus is standing right there and you're in the comfort of the garden. But it's a lot harder when you're alone by the fire, surrounded by his enemies. When it gets down to it, what will we do? You see, for something to have value, it's going to require effort. It's not going to be something we say, well, I'll do that, I'll follow God, and that's it. We've got to do something. We've got to be hard. It may be hard. You know, consider that in our own lives. It's easy to say, I will submit myself to governing institutions because the scriptures say it, when the government does everything that I like. When they don't pass a law that's inconvenient or difficult for me. When they tell me to do something that I'm not so upset about doing. But what happens when it gets hard? I say I'm going to go to church. I'll be faithful in attendance. But what happens when it hurts to get up and go? What happens when there's difficulties and dangers? What happens when it gets uncomfortable? Do we still go? Do we still make the same commitment? When it gets down to it, are we willing to put the effort in even when it hurts, even when it's difficult, even when it's uncomfortable? Jesus told his disciples in the garden. He told Peter before he ever made a statement in Matthew chapter 26, verse 41, keep watching and praying that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. To make something that lasts, it's going to require effort. And bar of steel has to be beaten. It's going to be put in the fire. And Christians, if we're going to have a faith that lasts, it's going to require effort. The Hebrew writer told Christians in Hebrews chapter 12, verse 4, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding blood in your striving against sin. He says that verse like he thinks it's going to happen. It's not a theoretical thing of, it might come up, that it might cost you a bit of your blood to remain faithful. He said it just hadn't come yet. You ain't got to that point yet. Have we got to that point yet? Have we already quit long before? This morning I was thinking about looking at a church, and I was thinking about older people that are extremely faithful. Every congregation I've been in, I've seen older people that I just think nothing could keep them away. The doors are open, they're going to get there. I thought, why aren't our younger generations like that? Why aren't our younger people like that? And then it hit me. Because the older ones are all the ones that left. There were plenty of people around them, but they're not here anymore. They're the ones that saw it all the way through. That's why we see it in the older generations, not because it doesn't exist even in younger generations, but it just looks differently because there's a lot of people that are there until it gets hard, until it gets difficult. When the blessings are flowing down, it gets harder when he tells us to do something we don't really want to do that hurts us, that makes it difficult. But if we want something that lasts, it's going to require effort. See, they usually don't make things like they used to because of cost. You see, it costs more. There's a demand of it. Like I said, there's not that physical effort, but there's a cost that comes with it. Once again, the Hebrew writer says in Hebrews chapter 10, verses 34 and 35, but you showed sympathy to the prisoners and accepted joyfully the seizure of your property, knowing that you have for yourselves a better possession and a lasting one. Therefore, do not throw away your confidence, which has a great reward. I want you to think about what that verse is saying. These Christians were willing to have their possessions, the things they had worked hard for, taken away, if it meant that they could stay faithful, because they knew they had something better. If it cost us every time we walked through the door, and I'm not talking about a free will offering, I don't know, a tax, a fine, would we do it? I don't know. It's a lot of money. They accepted, knowing they had a better possession. See, it'll cost us. There will be things we have to give up. There will be things that we have to sacrifice if we want a faith that lasts. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 13 and verses 45 through 46, a parable about a man who found a pearl. A merchant who was seeking fine pearls, and when he found it, that one pearl of great value, he went and sold all that he had and bought it. When he found that pearl that he knew was the one, he said, it doesn't matter what it costs me. If I have to mortgage the house, if I have to sell my car, whatever it takes, I'm going to pearl of great value. Is that what faith is to us? Because if we want it to last, it's going to cost. I'm afraid for too many of us, our faith is the pearl of it would be nice to have if I could get it on the cheap. If I could, if I don't have to put too much out to get it, it sure would be nice to have. It's pretty. It'd go well with things. I don't know if that's enough. If I don't want to pay that much. Jesus said the kingdom of heaven should be us to be something that we would sell all, give up all, sacrifice all. Because the value is so much greater than any cost. If we want a faith that's going to last, it's going to cost us. We may have to give up something. We may have to say goodbye to worldly things. Because to make something, to have something that lasts of great value, it's going to cost. Maybe they don't make things like they used to because we will accept, because we'll still buy them. Well, it doesn't last, but, we want one, so it doesn't matter. And it's cheap enough that we can just go buy another one later so it doesn't bother us too much. That's why knockoffs become so popular, right? Buy the off-brand. Wow, it's not, cheap, and then when it breaks down, it's no good, I get mad. I can't believe that. Well, what'd you expect? You get what you pay for. I'm always so happy when I get that deal at the beginning, but a few months later when it quits working, I think, why did I do that? But you see, many people do that with their faith as well. They'll accept a substitute. They'll accept something else because it seems so much easier, so much cheaper. And we'll accept that substitute. In 2 Timothy chapter 4, verses 3 through 4, Paul tells Timothy, he says, but a time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but wanting to have their ears tickled, they will accumulate for themselves teachers in accordance with their own desires, will turn away their ears from the truth, and turn aside to myths. He said, there's understood that time was then, and that time was before, and that time is now, because people have always bought easy answers. People have always been willing to settle for less. They don't last because we're willing to take something that isn't quite genuine. The prophets in the Old Testament, so many times when they were talking to Israel, hit that point to them. Ezekiel chapter 13:10, as Ezekiel tells those people, it is about the false teacher. He says, it's definitely because they have misled my people by saying peace when there is no peace. When anyone builds a wall, behold, they plaster it over with whitewash. You see, Ezekiel, like so many of those prophets, was delivering a message that God didn't want to hear God say, you can't be this way, you can't act this way, you can't do these things. So what do? They would listen to the prophets who would say, it's all going to be all right. Peace. Don't worry. Don't consider these things. He compares them to a wall that's been whitewashed. It's filthy, but we'll just wash right over it. Years ago, we were placing some carpet in the church building. And it was a building we knew we were going to last in very long, so we were trying to just do it. So the guy he got a deal on some carpet, but it was very light-colored carpet. And everybody complained and said, that carpet's going to show dirt so bad. And he said, well, we can clean it, that's going to be so much trouble. And he said, I got to think about how funny that is how we were willing to accept dirty carpet just as long as we didn't see it. Yeah, it's filthy carpet just as long as we don't see it. That's the way sometimes we like it as long as we don't see it. Whitewashed walls. Prophet Jeremiah spoke to the people in Jeremiah chapter 14, verse 34. He said, oh, my Lord God, look at the prophets are telling them, you will not see the sword, you will not have famine, But you will giving lasting peace in this place. But the Lord nor spoken to them. They're prophesying to you with false visions, divinations, futility, and the deception of their own mind. You know, lots of people will claim to speak for God. And they'll tell you what God has told them to say when in fact they have no authorization to do so. Something that is clearly not there. So why would people listen to them? Because it's a message they want to hear. Who doesn't want to hear the message of peace and safety? But if we accept less, we're not going to have anything that lasts. How many people, when the truth of God's word is presented to them, they'll just say, well, I can go over to church B, and they'll accept fill in the blank. You can say this, but for me, I don't want to hear that, so I'll go somewhere else. You see, the problem is we think faith doesn't last because we'll accept a substitute. We'll want something that tickles our ears. We'll cover up and see. But a faith that lasts is going to be a faith that deals with even the things when they're difficult. And that doesn't accept less than the complete, whole standard. Maybe it's our own fault. Because we accept less. Because we're not willing to pay for it. We're not willing to take the effort that's in to create it. We're not willing to take the time that it's required to have it. That may be okay, I guess, in products, but it's not okay when it comes to our faith. We must have a faith that's willing to last, that endures till the end. So do you want something that's going to last? Do you want something that's going to be there when you really need it? Because that's always the problem, right? That refrigerator always breaks down when it's, right? Always breaks down right before you're about to take, the car breaks down right before you go to take the trigger. You think, man, why didn't this thing last? If you want something that lasts, you got to look for the thing that's worth it. The Bible tells us in Hebrews chapter 13, verse 8, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Methuselah lived a good long time, but he died. The Oxford bell has been ringing for a long time, but eventually it will quit. But Jesus Christ is